Let's talk Formula One times Drive to Survive. Hello everyone, I am the Race Edit and welcome to my channel. You're probably wondering, who is this person and what do they know about Formula One? Also, you're probably thinking, not another Drive to Survive fan speaking on the sport. I'm going to be completely real with you. I once lived in a world where it felt like my entire life did not revolve around Formula One. I mean, sure, I knew of Michael Schumacher and Ayrton Senna thanks to my dad, and of course I knew about Lewis Hamilton, well, because he is Lewis Hamilton. But I didn't know much else of the sport, and I never would have predicted that I was going to fall absolutely in love with it. So yes, when Netflix brought on Drive to Survive in 2019, I pretty much paid it no mind until about a year or two ago. I had nothing better to do, and I ended up on Netflix, and it just so happened to be the very first thing on my screen, and I thought, why not? And from there, the rest is history. With all that being said, yes, Drive to Survive is what brought me in, but it's not what kept me. Actually, funny enough, I stopped watching Drive to Survive and I started watching the live races before I could even finish the season that I was on, because honestly, I felt like something was missing. I felt as if I wasn't getting the full story. It's like when a race ends and you see who the top 3 are in their results. If you were casually looking at the race, you would see who got P1, P2, and P3. But you wouldn't know the full race story and how they fought to get there. That's how I felt while watching Drive to Survive. Which is to no fault of Netflix, as they do have a show to make at the end of the day, and they can't include every single moment of the race in one episode. But that's what got me thinking, and I figured, hey, I may as well watch every season of Drive to Survive so far and do a race comparison and see how they fare. So now that that's clear, let's get into Australia 2018. Yes, let's take it back in time, to the days when Mercedes were still dominating, to when Daniel Ricciardo was still driving for Red Bull, or was just still driving in general. So yeah, let's break down the race. Starts off with Hamilton pole position, Kimi Räikkönen P2, and Sebastian Vettel P3. We then get Max Verstappen P4, and more importantly for this race, the two Haas's of Kevin Magnussen and Romain Grosjean P5 and P6. Nico Hülkenberg P7, Daniel Ricciardo P8, Carlos Sainz P9, and Fernando Alonso P10. I've shared an image of the remaining 10 on the grid for your viewing. So the green flags are raised and the race starts. You see Hamilton instantly leading into turn 1 and holding off Räikkönen, who was leading his Ferrari teammate Sebastian Vettel. Kevin Magnussen was able to gain a place ahead of Verstappen at the start of the race, putting him in P4 and Max in P5. This does become important for the first leg of Verstappen's race, as you will see later. By lap 2, Brendan Hartley is already in the pits due to a tangle at the beginning of the race. And honestly, that's pretty much his race for him. He makes no noise for the rest of it. Come lap 4, we see Verstappen hunting down Magnussen. He knows he has the faster car, and he really wants his position back. But Magnussen is not going to make it easy for him. On the other side of the Red Bull team, Daniel Ricciardo, with the help of DRS on lap 5, was able to go down the inside and get past Nico Hülkenberg, putting him from P8 to P7. Now, it may seem like I'm going lap by lap, but I'm not, I promise. It's more so the important takeaways that I noticed and how they'll compare in the show. Come lap 6, a Williams goes out, bringing out the yellow flags, and unfortunately for Williams, this does feel like a foreshadow for the rest of their season. And during the yellow flags, Marcus Ericsson goes into the pits due to an issue, and at this point, it was unclear as to if his race would continue or not, but I'm going to come back to that. So, going into lap 9, we then see Bottas in the Mercedes trying to get past Esteban Ocon in the Racing Point, and then finally into turn 3, he was able to get past Ocon. While all of this is happening, by the way, Verstappen is still chasing down Magnussen for P4, but his tires are hot, you guys, and then boom, come lap 7, he spins, and by this happening, it allows Grosjean and Ricciardo to get past him, bringing Max down by 3 points. And now back to Ericsson. Like I said earlier, we didn't know if his race was going to continue or not, but come lap 13, Ericsson is officially out. Lap 15, Pierre Gasly's Toro Rosso slows down. There's an issue. There was some smoking in the rear of his car, and his race is over.
Another one.
Come lap 16, there's a battle now for 4th position between Kevin Magnussen, Romain Grosjean, and Daniel Ricciardo. And while all of this is happening with these battles, these cars going out, and everything else, Hamilton is still the race leader, but he's looking for a way to gap the two Ferraris so they can't undercut him. And as we know, this is sometimes done easier when your teammate is in the same range as you, so you guys can work on a split strategy. But due to Bottas having a crash in qualifying, that did ruin Mercedes' plan for a split strategy. So come lap 19, Raikkonen pits first, and he gets out ahead of Kevin Magnussen, putting Raikkonen now in 3rd position behind Vettel, who's in 2nd. Hamilton then goes to pit after Raikkonen, and he rejoins ahead of the two Ferraris, but keep in mind that Sebastian Vettel has yet to pit, okay? By lap 20, the battle for 4th position is still going on, and then by lap 22, Max Verstappen goes to pit and ends up coming down to P14, which does suck for him because he did start off so strong in P4, but if you haven't watched this race, and if you haven't watched this episode of Drive to Survive, you'll see what happens. So now, we're going to go on to the all-important lap of lap 23. Sergio Perez and Valtteri Bottas are in the middle of fighting for a position, but this is when Kevin Magnussen goes into pit, and he comes back out, and then he slows down. There's something wrong with the car. Turns out, the rear left wheel was not attached properly, and unfortunately for Kevin Magnussen, who was racing such a great race, had to retire. And you would think and you would hope that that's it for Haas, but no. Let's go on over to lap 25. Romain Grosjean is then called to pit. He goes in. He exits. He slows down, and just like his teammate, something's not right with the car. His front left is also not attached. And that's that for Haas. What started off as such a great race for them and such a hopeful look ahead of their season ended just like that on lap 25. So a virtual safety car is issued, Bottas pits, Stoffel Van Dorn pits, and most importantly, Sebastian Vettel under the virtual safety car pits and comes out ahead of Lewis Hamilton, now making Sebastian Vettel the new race leader, Hamilton P2, and Kimi Raikkonen 3rd position. So pretty much from the end of the safety car on lap 31 up until the end of the race, lap 58, you have Hamilton trying and fighting to regain his position. Raikkonen in 3rd and Ricciardo in 4th are battling for 3rd position. And then you also have Verstappen and Alonso fighting for P5. And if you remember, Verstappen lost many positions due to his little spin earlier, and then when he went to go pit, he ended up P14. But lucky for Max, and even luckier for Red Bull, due to the virtual safety car and the way things just happened, Max ended up P5 ahead of Fernando Alonso. Now mind you, Max did have to give his position back to Alonso because of the full safety car from there, but their battle continues. So, the remainder of the race was just that. We also saw Vettel putting in fastest lap, and then Hamilton putting in fastest lap, and then Hamilton putting in fastest lap again. But in the end, it was Daniel Ricciardo who ended up getting fastest lap by the end of the race. So he didn't get P3, he was P4, but he did get fastest lap, so hopefully that helped for something. Okay, so that's the Australian 2018 Grand Prix. Now let's get into Drive to Survive. The anticipated, game-changing Drive to Survive, Season 1, Episode 1, titled All to Play For. The show starts off with Daniel Ricciardo speaking, and that does make sense as he is Australian and the first race is held in, Australia. We then get an introduction into Formula One. There's clips of the pit lane, cars racing, Christian Horner speaking as images of the team principals show on screen. There's an emphasis on teammate rivalries. They all believe that they are the one, and their teammate is their worst enemy. And what I took from Netflix emphasizing this is that the show is going to be set up in a way where teammate rivalries are at the forefront of storylines. And as a newcomer coming into Formula One, this is the introduction you get of the sport. We then go to Daniel Ricciardo 1 week before the Grand Prix, and he's talking about his love as a kid for motorbikes, NASCAR, but because Formula One has the fastest circuit cars in the world, that is why he got into the sport. The commentators point out about how no Australian has been classified in the top 3 of their home race. And I have to say, Netflix did a great job introducing the world to Daniel Ricciardo and how this season is essentially going to change the trajectory of his career, especially when looking back in hindsight. It's obvious to see that a storyline of this episode and possibly the season is going to be on Daniel and his career at Red Bull. There's also a point where Christian Horner states that Red Bull needs to win races this year and take the challenge to the big teams. He then goes on to mention that they are very fortunate to have Daniel, but they have an exciting emerging talent in Max. And if that's not foreshadowing, guys, I don't know what is. What I find great so far about the show is that you are able to see the driver's perspective and the team principal's perspective outside of press interviews on where their head is at before or after a race, and you do get to hear the story from their own mouths and not just from a headline. And I say this because we go on to the next big storyline of this episode, and of course, that's Haas. If you remember from the race breakdown earlier, Haas started off really well. They were 5th and 6th at the start of the race. Kevin gained a place ahead of Max, putting him P4, and due to a spin from Verstappen, Grosjean was able to get a place ahead also of Max, putting him in P5. So they, like I said, had a great race, and then due to the unfortunate pit stops, both cars had to retire. And if there's one thing Drive to Survive did, it gave us the full story as to what happened and why it happened. But before we get into that, we need to have a quick look at Haas's team principal, Gunther Steiner. And if you're a Drive to Survive fan, then you know all about him. So there's a quick introduction as to who Gunther is. He talks about how he loves racing, it's his passion, and how he worked his way up from a mechanic to get to where he is now. It was his idea to set up a Formula One team and to persuade Gene Haas, who had a successful NASCAR team, to join F1. There's an emphasis on Haas being the first American F1 team in 30 years, and they are also a younger team, so they need to produce good results. Gunther believes that they can do better than they did last year, aka the 2017 season, where Haas came 8th overall. Okay, so let's get into the fun part. Before the race starts, Haas F1 has a team meeting where Gunther is talking about how things are good on his and Gene's end, and the only thing is the pit stops. And I quote, he says, "I think on the pit stops, we have got a few new people, and it would be, I wouldn't say difficult, but you need to get used to the new people in pit stops, so I think we can do it." I just want to stop there for a moment and think about this, because when I first watched it, I was like, wow, Gunther. Although he has faith, he really did prepare his team. But now, as I sit here, I'm wondering if the speech he gave to the team was before the pit stop mishap or after, and if it was just a little bit of editing magic that was done. Okay, back to where we were. We have Kevin Magnussen, who was 26 at the time, and he talks about the pressure to deliver and to perform well, which is one of the hardest things about qualifying, but as we know, he manages to do well. Then we go to the race, and we know how it goes. K-Mag gets past Max and goes up a place. Daniel gains a place ahead of Nico Hülkenberg. Verstappen's tires get too hot, and there's a scene where Christian Horner is telling Max to save his overtake to where he feels Magnussen is most vulnerable, and as soon as that happens, the camera pans to Max spinning and then goes straight to the Red Bull pit wall. You then hear the commentators right away say, "This is dreamland for Haas, only Mercedes and Ferrari are up ahead. That's great, right?" But no, because Magnussen locks up, he goes to the pits, he gets out, and the camera pans back to the pit lane of Haas as Magnussen is leaving, and they look visibly confused. One of the mechanics says, "I don't think that's tight, the left rear." And you know what? As I was doing my race rewatch, I have to say, that's exactly kind of how it happened from F1 TV's point of view, so Netflix was able to catch that moment accurately. You then hear Magnussen say, "Failure, guys," and that's just heartbreaking. He has to retire, and on the show, he says, "It's heartbreaking. You don't want it to be true." And then Gunter goes on to say, "You just cope with it. They've got two drivers. Just try to stay as calm as possible and just focus on the race." And just like that, we go to Grosjean's onboard. He boxes. He goes into the pit lane. They let him out. And what's the same about both pit stops for Magnussen and Grosjean is that clearly a mechanic says no as the cars are released. Again, when doing the race rewatch and comparing it to the show, Netflix did capture this moment accurately. So Grosjean goes out, but he's slow. His engineer comes on and says, stop the car, we have a front left loose, stop the car. And at this point, it's pretty much just pandemonium for Haas. The team leaves the pit lane clearly upset. Grosjean gets out of his car and he is visibly upset. He waves to the fans, but it's evident to see that he is not happy. And you know what? Fair enough. First race of the season and he has to retire alongside of his teammate? That's not good. Gunter goes on to say, in Formula One, the highs are very high and the lows are very low. And that's pretty much the story of the race from Netflix's point of view. It fits the storyline that they need to convey. And while as the viewers, we are able to get more insight into Haas's pit stop debacle, you honestly pretty much know nothing else of the race. You know, in the end, they show that Daniel pursues Raikkonen for P3 and that Sebastian Vettel is the race winner. But what you don't see is that Hamilton was leading the race. And there was a decent battle for Mercedes and Ferrari for the top positions. And then due to a virtual safety car, Sebastian Vettel ended up pitting and he came out ahead of Lewis Hamilton. You also don't see that in the opening race of the season, there were 5 retirements. Isn't that crazy? So while I was watching the first episode, I had to wonder why Netflix didn't choose to highlight the race between Hamilton, Vettel, and Raikkonen as they were the top 3. And honestly, the only conclusion that I could come up with is possibly because Mercedes chose not to do the first season of Drive to Survive. And then that made me wonder, how would the first episode have gone had Mercedes chose to do so? I guess we'll never know. So the episode comes to a close. Daniel Ricciardo was not able to catch up to Raikkonen for P3, and it ends off with him saying that he believes he should be winning more frequently. And that was Season 1, Episode 1 of Drive to Survive. Was it a good first episode? Yes. Did I learn more about the drivers that were showcased? Yes. Did I learn more about what happened during the Australian Grand Prix? Kind of, but more so only the perspective of Haas and Red Bull. If I wanted to know the full picture of the race, I definitely would have had to watch it in real time. Do I think Drive to Survive is bad? Absolutely not. But I also think that as a fan of Formula One, I have to understand that the show is made for entertainment value and that some things may be more dramatized than they actually are. And now that I'm doing this race rewatch / show comparison, I am curious to see what parts Netflix chooses to keep and what parts they choose to omit, and how some of the crazy things that have happened in the past few years are going to pan out in the show. So that's my comparison. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen and to watch, and I'll see you in the next one.